Welcome to Discovering Joy with Roy. In this series, we've been exploring a strength that's available to us, a strength not our own. Today we'll look at a couple of biblical passages on the specific topic, everything I need for joy. I picked that phrase up years ago in a book I read by Max Lucado. It was called The Applause of Heaven. In it, he tells the story of Robert Reed, who exclaimed, "I have everything I need for joy." Now, that doesn't seem like an unusual thing to say, but let me tell you about the man who said it. Robert Reed had twisted hands and useless feet. He couldn't bathe or feed himself. His speech could hardly be understood. He had severe cerebral palsy. Yet he was joyful. And listen to this. The disease that kept him from walking and talking clearly couldn't keep him from graduating with a university degree in Latin. And it couldn't keep him from teaching at a community college, and it didn't stop him from becoming a missionary to Portugal. His story just keeps amazing me. He moved to Lisbon, Portugal by himself and rented a hotel room. He found a restaurant that would feed him after the rush hour, and he located a tutor to instruct him in Portuguese. He stationed himself in a park every day where he distributed brochures about Christ. 6 years later, he had 70 converts. He married one of them. This victim of one of our most highly dreaded diseases said he had everything he needed for joy. His story made me think of Bill Bish. Bill was stricken as a victim of polio as a boy before he had reached his full height. And as a result, his body, as it grew, was twisted into a hunchback form. One of his legs was nearly useless, not much more than bone wrapped around the skin. His distorted torso crushed down on his hip bones. What happened to his body was not as cruel, though, as the abuse he suffered at the hands of thoughtless people. Fortunately, Bill's parents loved him, and so did his church. Now, they did discourage him from becoming a missionary, which he wanted to do, because in those days, that usually meant going into some primitive area, and his body wasn't up to it. But they did encourage his walk with the Lord. In later life, Bill became one of the strongest supporters of missions I've ever known. If he couldn't go, he believed he at least could send. I can't ever think of Bill without a smile. I've never known a more generous, more considerate, more joyful person. Nothing pleased him more than to arrange a gift for someone, pay for it, and never let the recipient know who gave it. Never did I see him happier than the evening he told me in his living room, fairly bouncing in his chair as he did so, that his accountant had reported that that year he'd been able to give several tithes to his church. He marveled at how God had blessed him. Yet you'd have wondered in the beginning, when you saw him pushing a baby buggy filled with Raleigh products, which he sold door to door. It was the only way he could eke out a living. By the time I met him, he was in his 50s and was one of Oregon's leading state farm insurance salesmen. I knew him well because he and Elizabeth had bought a large house in the St. John's district of Portland so they could provide the church secretary her own apartment on the upstairs level, and on the main floor, they kept a room for the part-time youth directors, like me. There's so much I'd like to tell you about Bill and Liz. How Bill's first wife, Lucy's parents, threatened to disown her if she married that cripple. How they married anyway, and raised 3 daughters. How Bill and Liz both lost their first mates through illness. How she brought up 5 children without a father in the midst of the Depression. How Bill and Liz met and married in church, the tall lady and the little man. How they took budding young ministers like me under their wings and taught them like latter-day Priscilla and Aquila. You can see Acts 18 for that story. How they spoiled their grandchildren. How they remembered the Lord's work even in their wills, and so much more. But I must get on with this lesson. They came to mind, as I said, because of Robert Reed's profession of joy in spite of his rebellious body. Okay, I'm having trouble leaving Bill behind. Have you noticed how joyful people are like magnets drawing you toward themselves, brightening your day through their joy? And have you noticed how joyful people usually acquired their gladness in spite of, and not because of, their circumstances? We know this truth instinctively. Most of the stories we preachers tell about joy have this in spite of quality, don't they? We're not impressed with the story of a happy someone who is well-born, well-bred, well-fixed, well-connected. We want to know more. We'll withhold judgment, thank you, until we hear the rest of their story. How will this person react when, as we know it will, adversity finally hits? Will there still be a smile? Will he or she be able, in the words of James, to consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds? That seems to be the difference between happiness and joy, doesn't it? Happiness has to do with good things happening to us. A new car makes us happy, or a raise, or a dozen roses as a surprise. Or you might remember Charles Schulz's little book, Happiness is a Warm Puppy. Well, it is, when you're a child and the puppy is yours. But will the happiness survive through a serious accident in that car, or that layoff, or a Dear John letter, or the puppy's death? If it does survive, we don't call it happiness anymore, because something that doesn't depend on external circumstances has taken over. And we call that something joy. You've learned to say with the Apostle Paul, I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. What Paul is talking about is an unwavering sense of well-being that will not be defeated by circumstances. If we can't understand this quality of joy, we'll be baffled by Mother Teresa's answer. A Time magazine interviewer asked her, "What's the most joyful place you've ever visited?" She immediately responded, "Calcutta, Calcutta. When the people die in peace," she said, in the love of God, it's a wonderful thing to see our poor people happy together with their families. These are beautiful things. The joy of the poor people is so clean, so clear. The real poor know what is joy. The contrast on Time's page says it all. In the right-hand column is the conclusion of the interview with a picture exactly in the center of Mother Teresa's worn old hands resting in her lap, the fingers of her right hand gently folding her prayer beads. The other two columns contain a gaudy, full-color advertisement for Las Vegas. The beautiful blonde woman dancer having leapt into the arms of the handsome young man. And just below her leg is the caption, "The American Way to Play." Then the text, "Sultry, sexy nights and lazy summer days, wrapped around the most affordable excitement in the world. That's Las Vegas, where luck gets its name." There's your choice, joy or happiness. Sacrificial ministry among the dying, or superficial splendor among the playing. Put that to a vote, and America will, of course, vote every time to elect Las Vegas. Sex, play, laziness, glitter, gold, good luck. These are the favored delights of the pursuers of happiness. So we vote for Las Vegas and turn our backs on the poor people of Calcutta. Yet deep within, we suspect the greater blessing is to be found in following the footsteps of that little servant lady in India. Hers is the way of giving, Las Vegas's way of getting. Jesus had it right. It's more blessed to give than to receive. And for most blessed, you might read, more joyful. A long time ago, Thomas Aquinas mused, "No one can live without delight, and that is why a man deprived of spiritual joy goes over to carnal pleasures." It's easy to lose the distinction between joy and happiness. The two words are often used synonymously. In fact, Dr. William Sheldon defines happiness with words that I would use to define joy. He says, happiness is essentially a state of going somewhere, wholeheartedly, one-directionally, without regret or reservation. When Mother Teresa was still with us, you couldn't listen to her more than a moment without realizing she had decided long ago where she wanted to go and how she wanted to get there. She gave herself without reservation. Hence the calm, the state of blessedness that she radiated. But those Las Vegas advertisers, they were having fun, obviously. But was it joy? Ask that question after the dancing is over and the drinks have been drunk and the money has been gambled away and the wrinkles appear and the back can't lift the beautiful woman who is no longer beautiful anyway and she can't leap anymore. Here's the test. When it's no longer fun, will you still go wholeheartedly, one-directionally, without regret or reservation? If so, then it wasn't mere happiness, it was joy. It's the difference between the young people's dance, which goes around and around and around but doesn't go anywhere, and the old lady's worthwhile and rewarding journey. Now, to be fair, I must admit that there's room in life for both the dance and the journey. Celebration is an essential expression of life's blessings. Some things do make us happy, and we show it. Don't take anything that I'm saying in this video to be a complaint against laughter and singing and occasional frivolity. My purpose is simply to say a word in favor of the joy that sustains us when the laughter is silent. Joy is a kind of deep down exuberance that wells up from the depths. It's a bubbling up of the overflow, a sense that it is well with my soul. And that wellness doesn't depend on the props that Las Vegas happiness must have, or it collapses. Joy is Jesus' goal for us. He says, I've told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. We like the sound of these words, don't we? You'd think we'd speak more about them in Christian circles than we do. We hesitate because of the this in his sentence. I have told you this. We need to read the preceding two verses in John 15 to grasp his intent. Here it is. Now the Father, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you obey my commands, then you will remain in my love, just as I have obeyed my Father's commands and remain in his love. There's the rub. First comes the obedience, then the joy that springs out of loving and being loved by God. Things are turning serious now, aren't they? When we talk about obedience in relation to joy, our Las Vegas couple bow out. They've nothing to say. We can learn more from that saintly little lady in India. Now, she doesn't use C.S. Lewis's words, but her life expresses these words. Joy, Lewis wrote, is the serious business of heaven. It was through his own conversion that C.S. Lewis learned this truth. In his autobiography, appropriately named Surprised by Joy, he tells of the day that he and his brother Warren went to the Whipsnade Zoo for a picnic. Both men recorded the event in their journals. His brother Warren noted that they were especially attracted by a delightful brown bear, which sat up and saluted for buns. Jack, he said, that's C.S. Lewis, is full of the dream of adding a pet bear to our private menagerie, which he intends to christen Mr. Boltitude. The Mr. Boltitude of Lewis's book, Hidden Strength, was undoubtedly drawn from this experience. But something far more important and far less obvious to his brother was happening. In his journal, C.S. Lewis writes, when we set out, I did not believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And when we reached the zoo, I did. Yet I had not exactly spent the journey in thought, nor in great emotion. Emotional, he says, is perhaps the last word we can apply to some of the most important events. It was more like when a man, after a long sleep, still lying motionless in bed, becomes aware that he's now awake. More awake, we might add, than ever before. More fully aware of God and of life and of oneself, even the less savory aspects of oneself, as in the case of the New Testament's Zacchaeus. In Luke 19, Jesus meets Zacchaeus, who has long been one of my favorite biblical characters. I first identified with him in Sunday school when we sang this song, Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he. He climbed up in the sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. And when the Lord spotted him in his perch, he invited himself to the tax collector's home for dinner. Zacchaeus, you come down, we used to sing that, for I'm going to your house today. Well, the Bible reports that Zacchaeus did come down at once and welcome Jesus gladly. The proof of the gladness, a synonym for joy here, is evident in what follows. Zook zeroes in on Zacchaeus' dramatic change of heart. The publican, the tax collector, who seems to have more than one questionable tax transaction on his conscience, can't continue conducting his affairs as usual. Jesus has grabbed him by the heart. He can't associate with Jesus and be unethical at the office. Look, Lord, he says, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I'll pay back 4 times the amount. Here's the physical proof that a spiritual conversion has occurred. And Jesus assures him that today salvation has come to this house. Zacchaeus, snubbed by Jewish society because of his profession, he says, is a true son of Abraham. That's what Jesus calls him. A son of Abraham who believes a person's descent from Abraham is proved by his active faith rather than by his genealogy. Zacchaeus' conversion is genuine. It's apparent because it has reached every level of his character. The loner now wants reconciliation with those he has cheated. The lover of money has discovered a higher love. He who received Jesus gladly has entered into joy. Before adopting the New International Version of the Bible for my personal and pulpit use, I relied on the Revised Standard Version. In most ways, I prefer the NIV, but I do miss the Revised Standard's translation of Acts 2:46. It's a good text to use with Zacchaeus' story. It reads this way: day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they, that is the first Christians, partook of food with glad and generous hearts. There you have it, glad and generous. When Zacchaeus receives Jesus gladly, joyfully, the generosity naturally follows. It isn't possible, is it, to feel gladness and be stingy, or to feel generosity and feel unhappiness. Generosity is the mark of joy. These were the marks of the Old Testament festivals, which were even called your times of rejoicing. These feasts were the appointed times for the Lord's people to bring to the Lord offerings, accompanied by singing and laughing and dancing. The Israelites were ordered to offer sacrifice fellowship. I'll get this right. They were ordered to sacrifice fellowship offerings there, eating them and rejoicing in the presence of the Lord your God. Rejoicing. In Luke's history of the young church, he reports that the apostles, having been justly arrested, tried, flogged, and forbidden to speak the name of Jesus, left the Sanhedrin rejoicing because they had been counted worthy of suffering disgrace for the name of the Lord. There's was a sacrifice of a different kind. They were generously giving everything they had for the Lord. And the result? They were experiencing a joy greater than their punishment. The Bible says God loves a cheerful giver. Can there be any other result from genuine giving? The spirit of generosity and the spirit of joy are simply inseparable. Put another way, the bird of paradise alights only on the hand that does not grasp. Remember those careworn giving hands of Mother Teresa in Time's picture? They're the symbol of joy. So what about you and me? Open hands of generosity and joy, or clasped hands of selfishness and me-firstness? I bid you joy.